thank you all for joining us. I appreciate it. I'm Leemon Baird from Hedera, and we're going to talk today about something in blockchain, or DLT, distributed ledger technology, that people don't talk about a lot, and that is fairness. Is it fair? What does it mean to be fair? Why would we care about fairness? How can we be fair? This is something that is not talked a lot about. And we'll talk about it in an intuitive way, we'll talk about the math stuff, and we'll talk about what's going on and have a lot of fun. We have an hour and a half, but I don't want to talk for an hour and a half. I think that would be boring. So what I'm going to do is just talk for a half hour, and then we'll have 15 minutes for questions and discussion. And then I'll babble for another half hour, and then we can have more questions and discussion. And that's for the next hour and a half. For those who are standing, I apologize we don't have enough chairs. Maybe you can just sit down on the floor, or you can just stand for an hour and a half, but thank you very much for your presence and your interest. I greatly appreciate that. So, let's get started. We are talking about blockchain, or DLT, distributed ledger technology. A distributed ledger is a bunch of computers that come to an agreement. Some people use the word blockchain to mean DLT. Some people use the word blockchain to mean one particular kind of DLT. So it has two different definitions. So maybe a blockchain is a chain of blocks. Well, then it's just one kind of DLT, because you can do other systems that are based on DAGs and things that don't have a chain of blocks. Or you could just use the word blockchain to mean DLT in general. So I'll probably say ledger when I'm talking about it. A ledger is a bunch of computers that come to an agreement. They probably have a cryptocurrency. They might have smart contracts, that kind of thing. So this is what we're talking about. An exciting field of DLTs, ledgers. And what does a DLT do? The purpose of one of these ledgers is you have all these computers that you don't necessarily trust, and they come to an agreement. They come to consensus. What do they agree on? Well, people can submit transactions to them, and they all come to agreement on what order those transactions should be. They usually put a timestamp on those transactions. When did you send them to the network? And they also will update the state. So if you say a transaction to move some cryptocurrency from yourself to somebody else, then your balance goes down, their balance goes up, and they're keeping track of that. Or they use unspent transactions, which really is balances in disguise. But so somehow the state gets changed. That's it. That's what a ledger does. It's a group of computers that come to an agreement. It's all about trust. Even if you don't trust any single computer, as long as you can trust that the group as a whole is trustworthy, that's good enough. You can then absolutely believe that nobody is going to steal your money, no one is going to forge money. If you run a smart contract, a little program, it will run correctly. You can have 100% trust in the network, even though you don't trust any particular person in the network, which is a nice thing. It takes a weak form of trust and turns it into a stronger form of trust. It's a trust amplifier. So this is what a DLT does, these three things. And what would you use it for? Well, you use it for a million different things. You could use it for a stock market. You could be buying and selling stock that has been tokenized using your cryptocurrency or dollars that have been tokenized. You could use it for auctions. So everybody submits their bids and their asks to, or their bids to an auction, and whoever submits first and has the best price wins and gets the thing. You could use it for something like a patent office, where the first person to file a patent gets the patent. You can use it for games. There's lots of use cases for a ledger. People have said hundreds or thousands of use cases for ledgers. I think they're going to change the world. I just gave 4 examples, though. And these 4 examples have something interesting in common. Not every usage does, but these 4 have something in common in that the order matters. If you are in a stock market and you are trying to bid on a stock and someone else is bidding on a stock, if you bid first, you should win. If you both bid the same price, if you bid first, you should win. If they bid later, they should not. So you want to make sure the order is right. In fact, it is so important. People will spend hundreds of millions of dollars to shave a few milliseconds off of submitting transactions to a stock market. Order matters a lot. Or if you're playing a game, if you shoot me and I dodge, we care which one happened first. Did I dodge first and you missed? Or did you shoot first and you get a point? In an auction, it's the same thing as with the stock market. Who put it in first? In the patent office, it's first to file. Who filed first? There are a number of use cases where the order matters, where we care about the order a lot. In fact, if the New York Stock Exchange allowed certain people to manipulate the order of all the bids and asks, nobody would use it. It has to be fair. Now, on the New York Stock Exchange, you have to trust one company to make it fair. The point of ledgers is that you don't have to trust any one person. So the question is, could we have a ledger that is fair and not open to being manipulated? This is different from asking, can somebody forge currency? Can somebody double spend? All the ledgers stop that. That's the whole point of a ledger. But this is a further thing that we would want for some use cases, is to be fair in the order. Make it hard for someone to do that. Now, I said fair in the order. Actually, we're interested in 3 different kinds of fairness. We want to make sure that these transactions are put into a fair order, and meaning that it's hard for any one person to arbitrarily change this order. We also want to have timestamps on them, and we want fairness there too. You might have a legal contract that requires you to publish certain information before noon on Tuesday, and you don't want an attacker to be able to change the time to be later than noon on Tuesday. Okay, not change the time, but influence the time. So the whole group has to come to consensus on the time, but it can't just be one person's opinion of the time. You want it to be a fair timestamp. Or fair access. It shouldn't be one person who is the gatekeeper that could prevent you from submitting transactions to the network. You want it to be fair, where you can always get your transactions in. So really we have 3 different kinds of fairness. There are different ways to build a ledger. So if you're familiar with this whole DLT blockchain space, you're familiar with proof of work, which is what we started with Bitcoin. And maybe you're familiar with some of the leader-based systems, maybe based on Paxos or PBFT or Raft, where they take turns, or even other ones like an EOS, where they take turns being a leader. We have sort of a round robin, you take turns being a leader for a few seconds. You may be familiar with those sorts. You may be familiar with proof of stake. You may be familiar with a lot of different technologies. So let's talk about how people build ledgers and whether they have these 3 kinds of fairness. Okay, so start with the granddaddy of them all, proof of work. In a proof of work network, maybe you want to submit your transaction to the network. So you find any of the nodes are computers, together they run the network. They are, in Bitcoin you would call them the miners, that's who I'm talking about. In many networks you would call them validators. They make sure that your transaction is valid by putting them in order and coming to an agreement. So you just submit your transaction to anybody. Anybody gossips it to the rest. It spreads through the whole community. Eventually it spreads on to the miners. The miners all get it. And the miners use lots of electricity to solve a really hard math problem that doesn't actually benefit humanity in any way. Its only purpose is to slow it down. And eventually, after 10 minutes, one of the miners finally solves it. They've got supercomputers. They all live in countries where electricity is cheap, so they all kind of concentrate under one government. Maybe that's not so good. But eventually somebody wins. And they create a block. That square is a block. All that is a list of transactions that people have given them. And they get paid a little bit of coins for having mined this block. And they get paid something because of the transactions they've put in the block. And there is the block. And then they tell everybody else. And everybody else says, you won. You've solved the puzzle before I did. Okay, your block gets to win. Everybody was working on trying to solve the puzzle for a different block, but whoever wins gets their block to be official. Then everybody starts on a new puzzle. A puzzle based on this block to see who gets to do the next one. And so then, eventually someone wins, on average 10 minutes later for Bitcoin, and it gets put on top. And then everybody starts over trying to solve the puzzle to build on that one. And, 2 people won. 2 people solved it at the same time. Not all that common, but it can happen. Then what? Our chain is now Y-shaped. It has forked. Well, that's bad. So now everybody starts trying to build the next block. Well, I guess some of us will try to build the next one on this one, and some of us will try to build the next one on that one. Who knows which of those are going to win? Maybe we do it again. We both do the same one. But eventually, we're going to find that everybody working on one of them, somebody gets there first. And so eventually, one of them will become longer than the other. And the rule is, everybody is supposed to build on the longer one. And so eventually, this one will be so long that everybody in their right mind is building on this one. Nobody is building on this one anymore. And maybe this one gets longer by 6 different blocks after an hour. And we say, yeah, I'm pretty sure this one's always going to win. Nobody will ever add to this one again. At that point, we can throw away this one. So they become stale and we can discard them. This is how proof of work systems work. Beautiful. So fairness is not something you typically care about with something like Bitcoin. You just don't care. The whole point is to stop double spend. The whole point is if I only have one coin and I spend it at Alice's store and I also spend it at Bob's store at the same time, I'm trying to cheat and use the same coin twice, double spend. The community as a whole is going to put those 2 transactions in order. And whoever I spent at first, maybe they say that I spent at Alice first, she'll get the money, and Bob will be out of luck. Bob will have this transaction giving him money, but he won't get the money. He won't get the Bitcoin. And as long as we all agree on who was first, it doesn't matter on who we agree on. We can all agree Alice or we can all agree Bob. It doesn't matter. We just have to agree. We don't really care about fairness when you're just spending Bitcoin. So for Bitcoin, that's fine. However, for other ledgers, and there are other ledgers that use proof of work, Ethereum is a big one that uses proof of work, maybe we do care. Maybe we're running smart contracts and we're using one of those use cases I talked about. Maybe we care. Care about fair ordering. And as I said, maybe we also care about fair timestamps. And maybe we care about fair access. So, how would a proof of work system stack up on these 3? Can it do it? Well, you can get fair access. You can give your transaction to any random computer, and it will spread it out to everybody else. If that computer is dishonest, you could give it to a different computer instead, one that you trust. You get to choose who you're giving it to, so you still have fair access. And if you don't trust anybody, you can give it to several computers, and then if even one of them is honest, it will spread out. And once it is spread out to everybody, you are pretty much guaranteed that you have gotten it into all the miners. They all have received it. So in a sense, you have fair access. However, what's the timestamp on your transaction? Well, when somebody mines one of these blocks, they all by themselves get to decide what timestamp that block has. Now there's a few constraints. It has to be later than the median of the last 11 or something, which is like the last 2 hours. So they could lie and say it was an hour in the past. They could lie and say it's an hour in the future. They have a lot of freedom. Now different blockchains do it differently, but they have a lot of freedom in the time. They can lie about the timestamp. And it's just one person doing it. Everybody else that mines is in a sense putting their stamp of approval on that timestamp. So we have consensus on the timestamp. That's good, but it's certainly not a fair timestamp. One dishonest person could choose to put a very crazy timestamp on your transaction. So we don't have fairness of timestamps. We have consensus, but we don't have fairness. Again, for a typical Bitcoin transaction, who cares? We don't care about fairness. But if you're playing the game, if you're doing a stock market, you care a lot about fairness. If you have a legal obligation to do a contract at a certain time, you will care a lot, especially if the smart contract, to publish something at a certain time. If the smart contract, if the little program uses the timestamp to do some calculation, it might matter a lot whether the timestamp is right or not. Someone could attack you by putting in a bad timestamp. So we don't have fair timestamps. And then of course we also don't have fair ordering. Whoever won the competition to put that block in arbitrarily decides which transactions they feel like putting in it and which ones they don't. And if they don't like you, you get a delay of 10 minutes. You get to be put after all those other ones. Even if you submitted before them, even if you submitted many minutes before them, you still get delayed by 10 minutes. And if 2 people in a row are dishonest, you get delayed by 20 minutes. You don't have any fairness of the ordering because one person chooses what goes in that block. To really be fair, you'd have to say, well, we all contribute, and it, sort of reflects what we all think. But that's not here. One person chooses it, and then everybody else just puts their stamp of approval on it by building on it. So we're 1/3 of the way there. Great. Well, let's try something else. Let's see if we can do something else. So, let's talk about a leader-based system. Here, the nodes are Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave. These are the computers of our network, and somehow they pick one particular node to be special. Everybody sends their transactions to Alice. Alice puts them in order, and Alice sends them back out to everyone. And maybe we do another round. Everybody tells her a receipt, and then she sends the receipts back out. But they end up being absolutely guaranteed that they all agree on the order. One person, though, gets to decide. Now, Alice gets to put things in order. And when she gets a transaction, she could just hold on to it for as long as she wants, or even throw it away and never put it in. She could say, I'm never going to accept any transaction from Bob. I just don't like Bob. Or even worse, she could say, I'll never accept a transaction from anyone if it was signed by Leemon. I don't like Leemon Baird. So I'm just never going to accept any transaction signed by Leemon, and I have no recourse. And if we take turns, well, then I have to wait until the next person's turn. Because it's one person setting the order and deciding whether it goes in at all. So, how does this fare on fairness? I mean, even worse. I don't have fair access or the other two. Because now I can submit to anybody, but it all has to go through Alice. So if Alice doesn't like me, I'm out of luck. Okay, those weren't so good. So, what we need for fair timestamps is something that we don't get with proof-of-work systems, and it's something that we don't get with leader-based systems. So could we design a system that would be fair? There's actually 30-year-old systems that are fair, voting systems. So how does that work? Okay, so let's think about this. What we need is for the whole group, let's talk about timestamps. Because actually the other two are pretty easy. Fairness of access is easy. As long as you don't have a leader, then fairness of access works. For the same reason it works in Bitcoin, it would work in any system that doesn't have leaders. You can submit to any node if you don't trust it. You can choose which node to submit to, so you can submit to one you trust. If you don't trust any of them in particular, then you submit to multiple nodes. Fairness of access is easy as long as you don't have leaders. Fairness of ordering would be easy if we had fair timestamps. We could just all agree on a timestamp for each transaction, and then just put them in order according to the order of the timestamps. That'd be easy. We just put them in order by when you submit it, or when they reach the network. And so we just need fair timestamps. So it all comes down to how can we get fair timestamps? If we can get fair timestamps and not use leaders, we can do the other two things. And a fair timestamp should be the time on the transaction should be when it reached the network. That's what's fair. If you got yours out to the network before I got mine out to the network, you should have an earlier timestamp than me. You should win. But what does it mean to reach the network? Is it when you create your transaction? Would that be fair? Well, not really. Because you might create it and then you never even submit it until a year later. Do you want to retroactively give you credit for a year ago and you're only giving it to us today? That wouldn't make sense. Or is it when it reaches the very first computer in the network? We have the same problem. Maybe that computer holds on to it and never gives it to anybody. It still doesn't work. Maybe it's when it reaches the very last computer in the network. Maybe you get credit for when you have finally reached the last person. Oh, that doesn't work. What if one of the computers is turned off? You would never get a timestamp, forever. I think the fair way is when you reach half the network. At the moment when you have reached the majority of the network, we'll say that you have reached the network. That would be the reasonable way of doing it. So, let's say that. Let's say that fairness is, when you reach half of the active nodes. Not the ones that are turned off, but of the active nodes, when you reach a majority of them. So, that is called the median. You put them in order, find out when it reached each person, sort them in order, and take the middle one on the list. Okay, that would be fair. Now, people have thought for a number of years about how you could mathematically define fairness. For example, Stoltz and Gottenhofer, I don't know if that's how he pronounces it, I apologize if that is incorrect, but these people published something that they called median validity. Now, this wasn't about timestamps. This was about anything you measure. They just imagined something like a whole bunch of computers are measuring the temperature, and we want to find sort of what the consensus temperature is. And they said, well, it's a fair one if it's sort of like the median, sort of like the middle of all the temperatures. And they gave this equation. G is an array of all the different temperatures that were measured. And X is our final consensus temperature. And they just say that X has to be between two of the elements of that array. And not just any two elements, it has to be somewhere between the 15th percentile and the 85th percentile. And they said, okay, if you always achieve that, then you have a fair median validity. You have achieved median validity. That's kind of cool. You know, intuitively, the median is the right answer here. So, wow, that is really bad. Intuitively, that's good. Except there's two problems with their definition. It's too narrow and it's too broad. It has both problems. So it's too broad in that even if everything goes well, if everybody is honest, if all the computers are turned on, if everything is perfect, all it guarantees is that you're going to be between the 15th and 85th percentile, basically 1/6 and 5/6. Well, what I'd really like to say is, well, in the best case where everything's going well, I'd like the algorithm to use the median. After all, it's called median validity. So they're being kind of broad. They're including algorithms that really aren't very fair, aren't as fair as they could be, even in the best case. So we would like to broaden we'd like to narrow it down. We'd like to only have the really good algorithms count as being fair. We'd like to set a higher bar for how good something has to be called fair. They're also, however, too narrow. They are assuming a synchronous network, not asynchronous. So in the world of ledgers, we have Byzantine fault tolerance, and it can be asynchronous BFT, or it can just be BFT, not fully asynchronous, only partially asynchronous. That is talking, asynchronous or not, that's talking about, do you make assumptions about how fast the internet works? Like, if you had a math proof, my system is perfect, it's secure, it's fair, as long as the internet never loses any messages and never gets any messages delayed by more than a few seconds. Okay, that's a nice math proof. But in the real world, the internet isn't perfect. So you haven't actually proved anything. This algorithm doesn't really work in an asynchronous case where messages could be delayed arbitrarily long. See, this thing assumes that we're going to wait until everybody has submitted This thing assumes that we get an answer from everybody. And you weed out the dishonest people who just refuse to give you an answer by saying, well, we know that the internet always transfers everything within 10 seconds, so we'll just wait for everybody who gives us something within 10 seconds, and then we'll stop. We'll stop waiting. That's what they're assuming. Not really a good assumption. In the real internet, you might be a perfectly honest person, but you are attacked with a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack, where people have compromised computers and they're just flooding you with packets and they shut you down. And then you wouldn't be able to get your message out within 10 seconds. This is violated all the time in DDoS attacks and botnet attacks. So it's not a very good assumption. And if you don't make this assumption, then their definition doesn't actually work. So what we would like to do is generalize this so it even works in the asynchronous case. We want to have a really strong algorithm that's secure even if the internet is the real internet. And we still want to be able to call things fair. And we want to narrow it down and say, well, in the ideal case, you actually get the median. So let's change the definition of fairness. Let's slightly modify this one. Here's a better definition. Ordering is fair if you do three things, if you achieve three things. We'll say a ledger is fair if this ledger is good enough to achieve these three things. Of the honest nodes, we want most of them to have the ability to contribute to the answer, to influence the answer. We're not going to say that every honest node has to influence the answer, because maybe some poor honest node is a victim of a DDoS attack, and they've been shut down for a long time, and they don't get a chance to contribute. That's okay. But we do want to make sure that most of the honest nodes get to contribute to the answer. After all, if the answer is coming entirely from dishonest nodes, they could say that they received your transaction 1,000,000 years in the future. And they could lie. Or 1,000,000 years in the past. Or they could say, we received Alice before Bob, when really they all received Bob before Alice. So what you want to do is you want to say, to really be fair, most of the honest people get to contribute to the answer. Every single time you do a timestamp, most of the honest people get to contribute. So they're in this set S of people who contributed. And T, the consensus timestamp, is going to be the median of when they received it. So you take the people that are going to contribute and you ask each of them, when did you receive it? So if we were going to have everybody in this room playing this game, not all of you would contribute maybe some of you are asleep, but we would have to have a theorem that most of you get to contribute, and of those who contribute, of those of you who are active, not just turned off, you are going to tell me what time you received the transaction. We're going to put all those times in order, sort them in order, and take the middle one on the list. And that is what T is going to be. Furthermore, I want a further guarantee that T is the time that an honest node received it, or it's between the times of two honest nodes. So a dishonest person might say, I received it 1,000,000 years in the future. We want to make sure that our consensus doesn't end up being 1,000,000 years in the future. Or they might say, I received it 1,000,000 years in the past. We want to make sure our consensus doesn't do that. We want to make sure that our consensus comes from an honest person or is between two honest people. So let's define fairness to be this. Basically the median, the middle one. It's when you reach half the world. This is a good definition of what we mean for fairness of timestamps. Then fairness of ordering is easy. Just put them in order by their timestamp. Since we've all agreed on the timestamps, we all know what the order is. It's put them in order by their timestamp. And fairness of access is easy as long as there's no leader. So if you have a system with no leader, fairness of access is easy. So this now is the key. We want to find a system that will satisfy this. Clearly, proof of work does not satisfy this, and leader-based systems do not satisfy this. Can we build a system that does? And so I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger. Is it possible to have a system that is fair? This is what we mean by fair. We've defined it very clearly now. It's now a clearly defined question. What's the answer? Can we do it? And I will leave you on a cliffhanger there.